Have you ever heard of a hero who was broken, not by fear but by loyalty? That's right, while many people idolize characters who slay dragons, wield flaming swords and conquer kingdoms, almost no one talks about the rarer kind of courage, the kind that stands strong even when everything goes wrong. Húrin Thalion isn't the hero of victories, he's the hero of scars. The man who faced Morgoth himself, not with brute force, but with something even more dangerous in the eyes of the enemy, unyielding integrity. And maybe that's why his story is so forgotten. Because it doesn't stroke the ego, it doesn't end with applause, but with silence. Húrin wasn't rewarded, he was broken, humiliated, and yet he stood tall. Have you ever stopped to think what that means for you? Living in a world where one mistake is enough to be cancelled, one opinion to be judged, or one loss to be discarded. Because this story might teach you more about yourself than any self-help manual out there. Over the next few minutes, you're going to dive into a dark journey, not to scare you, but to awaken you. You'll understand why Morgoth's curse is more relevant than it seems. You'll realize that resisting pain, pride, and the desire for revenge is a daily battle. And perhaps, just maybe in the end, you'll discover that bearing a burden with honor can be the most powerful way to leave a legacy. But before I tell you how Húrin defied the greatest Dark Lord of Middle-earth, I need to warn you. This story isn't for the faint of heart. It's going to poke at old wounds, shatter illusions, and, if you let it, ignite an ancient fire that you might not even have remembered you were still carrying inside. Have you ever really thought about what it means to be fearless? It isn't just about facing danger head-on, it's about having courage when all seems lost. Húrin, son of Middle-earth, was the kind of man who not only stared down Morgoth's enemies, but made them retreat with a mere look. From an early age, he carried the ancient fire in his heart, the kind that refused to bow, even in the face of the impossible. It was as if, deep down, he knew his mission went far beyond mere survival. Born in Gondolin, a land marked by icy winds and tales of bravery, Húrin came from the house of Hador, where blood ran with the memories of kings and warriors. And don't think that was just a fancy title. He showed, day after day, what it meant to honor that legacy. In times when most people hid in fear of even uttering Morgoth's name, he raised his voice, his weapons, and his soul, ready to protect everything he loved. It's no exaggeration to say that Húrin became a legend in his own lifetime. He was the kind of warrior who inspired others, who made the young dream of glory, and the old believe that hope was not lost. Remember those moments in life when you feel compelled to act, even with no guarantees? That was exactly what drove Húrin, an example. He trained with the village youth, not to show off that he was the best, but to make sure that when Morgoth's shadow arrived, no one would be defenseless. Tolkien, in writing about him, wasn't just creating a character, he was recording an archetype, that of the hero who bears the collective weight of responsibility on his shoulders. If you've ever read books like Svetlana Alexievich's The War Does Not Have a Woman's Face, you'll understand that there are real figures in human history who embody that same spirit. Húrin was one of them. Only, amid the mythology of Middle-earth, his brilliance seems even more intense because he fought not just armies but destiny. And the most interesting part, even with all that strength, all that honor, he was still human, with mistakes, pain, difficult decisions. But what made him truly great was his constant choice to do what was right, even when doing the right thing came at a heavy cost. And, mind you, that was just the beginning. Because even before he became the most feared name among Morgoth's followers, Húrin had already faced something that would change the course of his life and the entire history of Middle-earth. Sometimes, fate plays funny games with you, doesn't it? When everything seems lost, an unexpected force appears, and it's precisely then that the greatest lessons are learned. With Húrin, it was no different. During a patrol with his brother Hor, still young and full of impulsive bravery, they were ambushed by orcs in an attack that had all the makings of a tragedy. But as they say, when the world of men shuts its doors, the realm of the Valar might just open up. It was then that Ulmo, the Valar of waters, decided to intervene. Yes, Ulmo, the one who rarely made his presence known, felt that there was something special going on. And as if that weren't magical enough, coming to his aid was none other than Thorondor, the Lord of Eagles, a legendary creature larger than any eagle in our world, with wings that slice through the skies like thunder. Just imagine standing on the brink of death and all of a sudden being carried through the heavens by an almost divine entity. It's the kind of scene that can make even an atheist reconsider things. But the most fascinating part of this story wasn't just the spectacular rescue. It was the fate that led them to Gondolin, the hidden city, the last refuge of hope against Morgoth. Very few were privy to this secret, and Húrin, upon setting foot there, entered a lineage of trust so rare. That vow of silence he made there might seem purely symbolic, but as we'll see later, it came at an extremely high price. How many times in our own lives has a secret or a promise changed everything? If you stop to think, this episode speaks volumes about synchronicity. Sometimes we're in the right place at the right time, or in the wrong place, depending on your point of view. But there's always something bigger happening in the background. Whether you believe in fate or not doesn't matter here. What matters is recognizing that there are moments when forces beyond our control interfere. And when they do, it's best to be prepared, just as Húrin was, not as a victim, but as someone who understands the value of a promise. And here's something curious. Even though he was saved by higher beings, Húrin never felt any less than he was. On the contrary, it strengthened him. It made him realize that sometimes even the strongest need help. A lesson many modern leaders, in fact, could learn. Because true power isn't about never falling, but about recognizing who picks you up. And in Húrin's case, that lifting was literal. Only what he didn't know was that by touching the skies, he was also sealing the beginning of his descent into the deepest abyss. Some battles are remembered for centuries, while others are felt for generations. The so-called Nirnaeth Arnuidiad, or as it came to be known, the Battle of Countless Tears, wasn't just an epic clash in Middle-earth. It was a collective lament. And in the midst of that chaos, who was on the front? Lines standing as an unyielding rock, none other than Húrin. When many had already lost hope, he was the one shouting to the heavens, "The day will come back," as if he were trying to reignite the sun with his very voice. Alongside legendary figures like Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, and Turgon, King of Gondolin, Húrin was more than a warrior. He was a symbol. As Morgoth's armies advanced, like a black tide, he wielded his axe with such fury that it said the blade even rusted with the blood of trolls. Imagine the intensity of that combat. It wasn't just about physical strength, it was about soul, about moral resilience. It was the stubbornness of the righteous incarnate in steel, a true medieval tank with the heart of a poet. And the most amazing part? Húrin could have run. Turgon, his ally, had the chance to retreat and fight another day. And you know what Húrin did? He defended Gondolin's exit with such multiplied fury, it was as if he had an army in himself. It's like that friend who not only stands by you, but stands in for you. With each enemy felled, he shouted, "The day will come back." Not just once, not twice, but 70 times. If that isn't unwavering faith, I don't know what is. How many times do we give up at the first stumble, when this man turned every fall into a cry of hope? Of course, such courage doesn't go unnoticed. At the end of the battle, he was captured by Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs, a creature made of shadow and fire, whose very name makes anyone tremble. But Húrin, he did not bow. not even before an entity of immeasurable power. It reminds me of those great real-life figures who, even when imprisoned or tortured, never renounced their truths, like Nelson Mandela in his cell, or even Socrates in the face of death. Húrin belonged to that same pantheon, those who resist until the end. But the story was far from over, because Morgoth, upon capturing Húrin, saw in him more than a prisoner. He saw an opportunity, a chance to use that man's unbreakable spirit against him. And that's how the cruelest chapter of Húrin's life began, a chapter where the enemy wielded not a sword, but words, curses, and twisted visions. And as we'll see, that was far worse than any physical battle. Some prisons have no bars. They're made of pain, silence, and visions that never fade. Morgoth, Lord of Darkness and Master of Manipulation, didn't just want to destroy Húrin physically. He wanted to break his soul, and to do that, he created something far more cruel than torture. A throne of stone where the warrior was bound, not by chains of iron, but by enchantments that forced him to watch, for decades, the collapse of his own lineage. And he watched, helpless, unable to change the fate of his children, his wife, the legacy he had fought so hard to protect. Imagine the agony of watching every step taken by your loved ones being guided by deceit, by tragedy, by the subtle poison of a curse. Húrin saw his son Túrin lost amid illusory glories and disastrous choices. He saw his daughter Nienor plunge into irrevocable darkness, all orchestrated by Morgoth, with layers of cruelty befitting a dark and calculating mind. The most perverse part, Húrin never broke his vow. He never revealed the location of Gondolin, and yet his loyalty was punished. This kind of punishment makes us reflect on the cost of integrity. How many times in real life do honest people end up paying for keeping their word, while those who sell out to the system prosper in the eyes of the world? Tolkien himself understood this deeply. He had witnessed the atrocities of World War I, where good men died in muddy trenches while politicians smiled at banquets. Húrin embodied that silent yet dignified bitterness. And let's face it, that really resonates. And don't think Morgoth did this merely for sadism. No, there was strategy there. He knew that a father's heart can be weaponized. He wanted Húrin to hate his own allies, to question his choices, to doubt the good. And it worked. When he was finally freed, Húrin was no longer the same. Not because he had given up, but because he carried within him the invisible scars of one who had seen too much. And, as they say, there are pains that only the eyes understand, and that no remedy in the world can cure. But even so, he kept walking, because that's what greats do. They keep going, even shattered, even broken inside. Húrin's journey didn't end on that cursed throne. On the contrary, it was there that his darkest pilgrimage began, not across battlefields, but through the ruins of his own existence. And what he saw when he returned to the world he once knew was even more devastating. And then he returned. But he was no longer the man who wielded an axe against Morgoth's servants. Húrin walked as if carrying the weight of an entire world on his shoulders. Imagine wandering through Middle-earth, treading on places once full of life, and now just ruins. Dor-lómin was no longer home. Doriath, which once seemed a refuge, turned into a stage of discord. The tombs of his children, echoes of a tragedy that not even 1,000 years of silence could erase. He passed through every scene, as if searching for something. Perhaps forgiveness, perhaps meaning, or maybe just an ending. He accused Thingol, king of Doriath, of not having protected Túrin as promised. But deep down, maybe he was trying to blame someone, anyone, to avoid succumbing to the guilt that Morgoth had planted within him. You know that feeling of looking back and wondering if you could have done things differently? Húrin experienced that with every step, with every familiar face that no longer recognized him. But not everything was empty. Amid the pain, he still had flashes of clarity. He returned Morgoth's cursed gold to the dwarves, refusing to perpetuate the cycle of destruction. It was a small gesture in the eyes of the world, but monumental for the soul of someone trying to make peace with what was left of himself. Sometimes it's these quiet gestures that show who still has honor. Even wounded, Húrin demonstrated that nobility can endure, not as glory, but as dignity. And then, without fanfare or farewell, he walked to the sea. They say that there, amidst the waves and the salty wind, he found his final peace. It wasn't a heroic ending in the classic sense, but perhaps the bravest of all, accepting one's own mortality, accepting that we're not made of steel, that there comes a time when even the warrior must rest. The sea of Middle-earth embraced Húrin, not as punishment, but as a cradle, like a final embrace from creation to one of its most tragic children. And here's the most curious part: even with all that suffering, even with a story marked by loss and tragedy, Húrin's name still echoes, it still inspires, because he wasn't the hero who won, he was the hero who endured. And in Tolkien's Middle-earth, in a world where Morgoth's shadow stretched over everything, sometimes just holding on is a victory in itself. And that's when the story grows even more powerful. So now tell me, after learning about Húrin's journey, what's still holding you back from facing your own demons? You saw that not even Morgoth's curse could extinguish the light within. That man, he didn't win in the conventional sense, but who says that true triumph needs to come with medals? Sometimes winning is simply about moving forward, pressing on even when the world seems to crumble, continuing even when no one else believes, persisting even when it feels like it's just you and your truth. Your life, just like Húrin's, will have battles. Some you'll win, others you'll lose, but the question remains, will you bow or will you endure? Will you let the world shape you, or will you shape the world with that unique weight only you carry? Maybe today is the day to stop seeking approval and start building your own legend. Now tell me, what part of your story is still trapped like a stone, watching everything unfold without action? What's stopping you from rising up and taking control, from leaving behind that throne of pain and moving forward, even with a heavy heart? If this story touched you, drop a comment below. Tell me which part resonated with you the most. Let's talk. Let's grow together. And of course, if you want to continue exploring the deepest secrets of Middle-earth, the mind of Tolkien, and life-changing stories, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because this is just the beginning. The next chapter is already being written, and who knows, maybe you'll be the protagonist.